Hey, I wonder what this button does. Oh, fuck. Oh, shit, that was easy. I'm back, bitches. Yep, it's Rufus. Been a while since I last posted, but have no fear, I am here, and I've been cooking up some hot new videos for your asses. Now, anybody who's been following this channel for a while knows that I'm fucking obsessed with old school first-person shooters. Hell, I feel like I mentioned Doom in like every episode. I also love horror games, so a horror-themed old school first-person shooter is pretty much an instant boner for me. But I didn't just start this channel to talk about old games. I've also always wanted to spotlight newer titles which, despite kicking major ass, tend to fly under the radar of mainstream gamers. Well, lately I've been obsessed with a game that came out just last year, but really nails it at capturing the blood-soaked, frantic murder mayhem of the classics. Dusk. Yeah, it's pretty fucking awesome. Let's start this shit. Okay, so immediately the fake DOS loading screen hits me right in the nostalgia. Fuck, I'm a sucker.
Kill the intruder.
Yeah, so it's basically pure murder straight from the start. You're given no backstory whatsoever on the way in, no cutscenes or text to tell you what the fuck is going on, and your character never speaks. You are known simply as Dusk Dude, in the spirit of Doom Guy, although you look a hell of a lot more like Caleb from Blood, but with a badass beard. So at the beginning of the game, you find yourself hanging from a pair of meat hooks in a creepy-ass basement with strange writing and mysterious symbols all over the walls. You escape and find yourself at a spooky farmhouse deep in the woods, surrounded by fucked up monsters. So naturally, you start exploring and shooting the fuck out of everything. The plot from here on isn't super involved. There's no dialogue in the whole game, besides an occasional creepy demon voice.
You'll pay for that.
Besides that, there are only a couple of brief text cutscenes straight out of Doom to tell you what's going on. So most of the story is inferred through shit you find on the levels themselves, like creepy-ass graffiti written on the walls in blood. As it turns out, the entire game takes place in a town called Dusk. Population 666. Nice. Apparently, some ancient ruins were found under the city and then excavated, which, of course, unleashed mysterious evil forces that have now turned every living thing in town into a possessed killing machine. The military tried to harness the otherworldly power for their own ends, and erected a giant wall around the center of town to keep it isolated, but of course this immediately failed, and both the soldiers and their scientists also got possessed and turned into a bunch of homicidal fuckheads. The only goal of the evil army of creatures seems to be collecting human flesh and transforming it into power for something evil deep below the town. And you, our nameless badass, are tasked with slaying all the demonic critters and literally getting to the bottom of it. The whole vibe is very Lovecraftian, except if Lovecraft wrote a ridiculous action movie. As far as gameplay, Dusk is, as advertised, an ultra-violent first-person shooter that pays homage to the classics of the 90s, right down to the pixelated retro graphics. You explore each level with the goal of killing every motherfucker in your path and finding the exit to the next one. The levels are non-linear, so there's usually multiple routes you can take to get around, in the tradition of all the classic shooters. You can swim too, so there are plenty of underwater pathways and shortcuts. There are also different colored keys you need to find to unlock certain doors, because of fucking course there are, as well as portals which instantly transport you to somewhere else on the level. Once you find the exit of a level, you get a good old-fashioned stat screen to tell you how you did, and then the next level starts. Usually right on the other side of whatever door you just exited from, so there's actually pretty good continuity. Naturally, there's also a wide variety of fucked up demonic monsters trying to kill you the entire time, everything from tiny little rats to enormous fuck-off boss battles, of which there are many. Some of these are just giant versions of regular enemies, but you also get some gems like Intoxicator, the big drunk alligator, and the Guardian, a huge mortar-spewing frogman. Fortunately for you, there's also a massive arsenal of weapons and ammo lying around everywhere, as well as various health power power-ups to give you a fighting chance. You don't have any armor, but collecting treasure boosts your morale, which essentially does the same thing, making you less vulnerable to damage. There are also explosive gas cans and barrels lying around everywhere for no reason, which you can use to take out enemies. It's all pretty standard first-person shooter stuff. With that said, the developers of Dusk really went above and beyond to make sure the gameplay was way more wild and action-packed than its contemporaries. There's no fall damage, meaning you can jump from fucking ridiculous heights without dying, which comes in handy because there are also jump pads everywhere that shoot you high in the air, letting you snipe enemies from above and get to hard-to-reach places. And while in midair, you can do front and back flips, which is mostly pointless but pretty fucking awesome, especially if you're still shooting guys while you do it. You can also spin your weapons like a Hollywood badass, which actually lets you do melee kills up close. There are also some pretty sweet temporary power-ups you can grab to amp up the gameplay. Fast fire radically increases your weapon's firing speed, letting you plow through bad guys like crazy. The aptly named climbing thing lets you climb up any wall like Spider-Man, but like Spider-Man with a shitload of guns. The thermal suit makes you invulnerable to heat, so you can run straight through hot lava. And my absolute favorite, the serum of blistering heat, makes it so that the entire game moves in slow motion and only speeds up when you move around, which is pretty fucking wild and a nice little tribute to the game Super Hot. There's also a lot of interactivity with your surroundings, a staple feature of all great shooters. And a few shitty ones. Almost every object in the game is breakable, often containing hidden goodies, so you get the visceral satisfaction of destroying fucking everything around you. You can also use a ton of stuff on the levels. Find a bed to take a nap and gain some extra morale, loot crates for treasure and ammo, cook and eat the flesh of your enemies for extra health, flush the toilet, why the fuck not, and then take a shower to wash all the blood off. Hell, you can even chug a bunch of beer and get drunk, which makes it impossible to aim, and is pretty fucking hilarious when you have fast fire on. You motherfuckers, I'll kill you, my bitches! You can also pick up and throw objects, letting you do cool shit like blow holes in walls with gas cans or eviscerate enemies with saw blades. There's even an object called the Crystal of Madness, which you can throw at enemies, making them go crazy and fight amongst themselves while you sit back and maniacally laugh. You can also stack things up to build stairs and reach secret areas. Did I mention the secrets yet? Well, like all great first-person shooters, there are a shitload of secrets hidden throughout the game, usually containing extra health, weapons, and power-ups, and there's a wide variety of ways to reach them. Some you find by spotting hidden doors, some by blowing holes in walls, some by landing absolutely insane jumps onto the top of tall structures, some by rocket jumping onto hidden ledges, cause fuck yeah, this game has rocket jumping. Hell, there's even one you find by putting a basketball through a hoop, and one you can only reach by flushing yourself down a toilet. So basically there's a lot of over-the-top ridiculousness in every level, and each one is crazier than the last. The whole game is divided into 3 episodes, each containing 10 regular levels and 1 hidden one. Episode 1, The Foothills, takes place in rural environments on the outskirts of town, so expect lots of farms and silos and tractors and shit, as well as the obligatory corn maze. There's also some more industrial areas like quarries, sawmills, and coal mines. Besides the creepy hooded cult members who are present throughout the entire game, the enemies are mostly country shit like scarecrows that come to life, zombie chainsaw rednecks, and these possessed goats called Black Phillip, which is a nice little nod to the witch. At the end of the episode, after you breach the giant containment wall, you arrive at the center of town and proceed to Episode 2, The Facilities, where the evil forces are busy harvesting the flesh of the unworthy. This mostly consists of massive outdoor factories, dark and mysterious underground military installations, and strange evil bases floating high in the sky. Most of the baddies here are military-industrial themed, like possessed soldiers and gun turrets, but this is also where you get your first look at some of the truly otherworldly creatures, like these scary as fuck invisible wendigos that only appear when shot. Eventually you find the excavation site where this whole thing started and cross over into Episode 3, The Nameless City, where shit goes completely off the rails. You find yourself in a massive complex of giant evil churches and huge demonic cities that appear to be built entirely underground. However, as you progress, it becomes clear you're actually in some sort of hellish alternate dimension built out of familiar things from the world above. This last episode is where the enemies get really batshit crazy too, like this dog tank thing, and whatever the fuck these are. And I don't want to reveal too much about the last few levels and boss fights, but they're awesome, and yeah, I don't think we're in fucking Kansas anymore. Besides the single-player campaign, there's also Endless Mode, a fun little challenge where you fight in arena levels to try and shoot your way through as many waves of enemies as possible before you die. Each arena is modeled after an episode of the single-player campaign. The farm is, well, a fucking farm from Episode 1. The factory is a military-industrial level like Episode 2. And my favorite, the cathedral, is a giant, hellish outdoor church from Episode 3, city, which gets destroyed by a giant tornado a few minutes into the fight, after which you continue to battle amongst the leftover ruins, which is metal as fuck. And last but not least, there's the online multiplayer mode, known as Dusk World. This consists of a variety of deathmatch levels where you can duke it out with other players around the world. Rather than everyone just playing as Dusk Dude, you get to pick an enemy from the game as your avatar and customize the colors. For example, my ass is a hot pink Wendigo, cause why the fuck not? And then you fight other players in a big old battle royale across a variety of maps, some of which are just altered versions of levels from the single player campaign, but there are some exclusive deathmatch levels included as well, and they're every bit as fun as I remember OG Quake World Deathmatch to be. Altogether, the game is one of the craziest and most fun first-person shooters I've ever played, and a fitting tribute to the bygone classics of yesteryear. So what incredibly talented game studio is responsible for developing Dusk? Dave. This guy Dave right here. Yep, the entire game is the creation of David Szymanski, an indie game developer from Pennsylvania who's previously only released a handful of short psychological horror games. Inspired by the madcap first-person shooters of his childhood, he basically built this thing single-handedly over a 3-year period. Of course, he had support from the staff of his publishers, New Blood Interactive, who are awesome, but at the end of the day, we have good old Dave to thank for the vast majority of Dusk's development. After a long series of demos, betas, and previews, the full version of Dusk was finally released in late 2018 and got pretty much universal acclaim from the critics that played it. It sold something like 100,000 copies since then, which is great for an indie game, but honestly a bit disappointing considering how fucking badass it is. The first reason this game is fucking badass is, as it should be, the gameplay. Completely putting aside the level design and graphics, the controls are good enough that it would still be fun to play even if you were just a square shooting other squares. The game physics are intuitive and fun, the controls are fast and responsive, and they've included all the old school first-person shooter quirks like rocket jumping and strafe jumping. Also, the entire arsenal of weapons is super satisfying to use. You start with just a pair of sickles, then pistols and shotguns, both of which you can dual wield. Naturally, you get a double-barreled shotgun and then a machine gun, all standard first-person shooter stuff so far. But there are some really memorable boomsticks on display here, like the hunting rifle for sniping foes from afar, the magic crossbow which can shoot through multiple enemies and even through walls, not to mention letting you hover in midair, which is kinda badass, the mortar launcher which lobs grenades you can remotely detonate, and the riveter which shoots extremely destructive explosive rivets at a high rate. And probably my favorite weapon, the sword, which lets you perform one-shot stealth kills, can be charged up for extra murder power, and even lets you bounce projectiles back at enemies. There's even a hidden weapon, the cigar, which, besides making you feel like Duke Nukem, slowly regenerates your health and also has a fucking ridiculous zoom so you can spy on people. The feel of all these weapons is phenomenal, so it's clear that Dave really spent his time getting the timing, power, and accuracy of each one perfected. See kids? Murder is fun. Secondly, the graphics are fucking awesome, and by that I don't mean high definition. Clearly this is a throwback to the old school, so the levels and enemies are built out of super basic polygons with obviously pixelated textures. And yet somehow the game manages to be more atmospheric and intense in its visual presentation than the vast majority of the big budget titles coming out of major studios these days. The game really utilizes this too, like how these fireflies in the swamp are really just solid pixels, but the low-res graphics makes them look like they're flickering in the night. The visual rawness also makes the spookiness of the surroundings way more visceral somehow, and even verges on psychological horror at times, especially when they pull a dick move like, oh no, you broke your flashlight. The game's murkiness is one of its essential qualities, but have no fear. For all the purists out there, the game offers super customizable graphics settings. You can turn everything up so it looks like you're playing a modern remaster, or crank it all the way back to 1993, the good old days when you could barely see what the fuck you were doing. You can also freely adjust the color balance, so if you really hate your eyes, you can even make it look like you're playing it on Nintendo Virtual Boy. Seriously, there's a fucking preset for that. Personally, I just left the settings at their defaults because it felt like how the game was meant to be played. But the flexibility is nice, and Dusk manages to strike a perfect balance between slick modern shooters and the grungy pixelated murder fests of yesteryear. Also, and I can't stress this enough, the level design in this game is fucking phenomenal. The levels start small and simple at the beginning, but trust me, they get pretty fucking massive and impressively complex as the game progresses. For example, one of the real standouts for me was a level called which starts as a pretty run-of-the-mill secret underground science lab straight out of Half-Life, but thanks to some bizarre physics-defying experiments they're doing, it quickly devolves into a mind-bending world straight out of an M.C. Escher drawing where up, down, left, and right don't mean shit, and then things get weird. Really weird. Another one that impressed me was Homecoming, one of the later levels in the game, where you find yourself in a world constructed out of your own memories of your home, but floating on a bunch of creepy islands in empty space. These bizarre gravity doohickeys found throughout the level let you turn the whole motherfucker 90 degrees in a random direction, allowing you to literally fall through space to reach the different islands of your memories, which you can then explore sideways. Besides some truly genius level design, the other thing that kept me coming back for more was all the goofy little gags they hid in every level. There are pop culture references galore, from movies like The Silence of the Lambs, jams, Evil Dead, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, to video games like Thief, Duke Nukem 3D, and even Commander Keen. Yup, there's a fucking dope fish up in this bitch. There are also a ton of little in-jokes hidden around, like if you manage to get yourself out of where the game is supposed to let you go, Dave left little messages telling you to fuck off, or how this boss is voiced by the actual boss of New Blood Interactive doing his best Arnold Schwarzenegger impression. Come on! Or this secret room named after the developer's wife. Or this one named after, and literally covered in, the daughter Dave had during development. In one secret area, you find a drawing that was apparently sent to Dave by a young fan, and they actually included it in the game. There's a whole sequence where you get shrunk down to the size of a mouse and have to fight around giant objects. And there you can find a secret door that makes you think you've escaped to a normal size hallway, but psych, it's just clever forced perspective, and now you have to fight the smallest boss in the game, a teeny tiny chainsaw redneck. And probably my favorite running gag in this game is the bar of soap. You can find one hidden on every level, which seems useless at first, but this little bar of soap is the single most powerful weapon in the entire game, able to kill any enemy in one hit, including all of the bosses, for no fucking reason except that it's funny. These are just a few examples of both the creative genius and random goofiness you'll find in Dusk, which is what makes it so compelling considering how fundamentally simple the story and gameplay are. And finally, this game may have one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. In the tradition of many of the great 90s shooters, the gameplay is accompanied by lots of big, dumb, loud, fucking aggressive industrial metal. This comes courtesy of video game composer and actual fucking Viking Andrew Holschult, and it's the perfect soundtrack to murdering the shit out of the forces of evil. It brings me right back to games like Doom and Quake 2. Oh, the hours I have wasted blowing shit up to butt metal. The only gripe I really have is that some of the levels get a little maze-like, and by that I don't mean overcomplicated. Many of the levels are big, but they never felt unfair, and I never had to use a walkthrough. But some of the more dungeon-like levels just feel a bit bland and repetitive, like you've walked through the same room 1,000 times. Normally this wouldn't be too big an issue. Hell, the original Quake consists entirely of bland, repetitive dungeons, and that's one of my favorite games of all time. But most of the design in this game is so interesting and visually compelling that it's a bit of a letdown to go straight from a beautiful outdoor environment to repetitive underground tunnels. Fortunately, there's only like 4 or 5 of these levels in the whole game, but still. That's literally my only complaint though. Pretty much everything else about Dusk is fucking badass, and surprisingly fresh considering it's based on a bunch of shit from over 20 years ago. So I'm gonna give this 9 killer bars of soap out of 10. It's a must-play for first-person shooter fans of any generation. Dusk is currently available on Steam for $20 and can be played on Windows, Mac, or Linux. For all you console people, there's also a version coming out soon for Nintendo Switch. No Xbox or PlayStation version just yet, and as of yet no plans for a mobile release. But if you have a half-decent computer, definitely pick up a copy and go blow some shit up. Sweet. Huh. Do a flip. Okay. Whee! Till next time, hugs not drugs. Fuck it, do the drugs too.